Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfic. This will be the continuation of Yuuei Survival Guide. This will be part 29, chapter 29. Izuku's train of thoughts crashes into a wall and derails completely as he stares wide-eyed at the little girl that's peeking out from behind Shigaraki. He opens his mouth to speak, but he doesn't think any sound comes out. For a moment, nothing moves, well, except the little girl who finally weaves out from behind Shigaraki and moves to stand in front of him. Little arms crossed over her chest and eyes narrowed on him like he's the threat here. Izuku's sure his jaw is agape as he stares down, mouth hanging wide open in surprise. His eyes don't leave the little girl because the thought of that child being here, in a villain's hideout, with villains, makes him feel sick. He'd known Shigaraki was bad, sure, but having a child here? A little kid no older than 10. That's sickening. "You have a child here?" Izuku finally manages to snarl out, gaze finally lifting from the little girl and up to Shigaraki, who looks faintly surprised. The villain's face twists behind the hand he's wearing, as he looks around the room briefly before he focuses back on Izuku. Shigaraki then reaches up and grabs the hand from his face with just 4 fingers, before he's pulling it off slowly and letting his hand drop to his side. Izuku stares angrily at the League of Villains leader, glaring into Shigaraki's now revealed eyes. To his credit, the villain looks taken aback slightly, almost confused under the general annoyance. "What the hell are you talking about, disciple?" Izuku, if he had working arms and wasn't tied up to Kachan's chair, he would have gestured sarcastically to the child that was stood literally in front of the villain. "The kid!" Izuku snaps instead, chin nodding downwards to the little girl who raises an eyebrow. "That kid! Why do you have a kid here?" Izuku hears from the side, and his eyes narrow and dart to the dark-haired villain, Dabi. "Who the fuck are you talking about?" "The girl!" Izuku fumes loudly, eyes shifting back to the child watching him. Her eyes have slivered as she studies him, and she doesn't look afraid or anything. She almost looks humored, little brown eyes studying his expression as she rocks on the balls of her feet. "You guys have a little girl here!" "Toga?" Kurogiri's glaring yellow eyes crinkle with interest. "I'd hardly say she's a little girl, Midori Izuku." "Me?" The girl in question squawks as if the deduction is absolutely absurd. "You meant me? That's so rude. I'm not a little girl. I bet I'm even older than you are, Izuku." Izuku blinks slowly in the direction that the rest of the villains are sitting. Toga looks genuinely annoyed as Dabi's lips are ticked upwards in amusement at this. He angles his head, taking the girl in more than he had during his abrupt, vaguely threatening wake-up call. She actually does sort of look young, not much older than him, he'd have to guess. The middle school uniform throws him for a bit of a loop, but he does believe that she's older than him. But she's not who he's talking about. There's a pause, as Izuku makes no move to explain himself, or his words, and no one seems to want to broach the subject either. The pause is short-lived as Toga huffs out an annoyed breath, tugging at the hem of her sweater and glaring down at it. "Does this thing really make me look that young?" Dabi eyes her easily before shrugging. "Yeah." "Of course not. You look like a mature young woman." The man, in a tight-fit rubbery suit, twice, Izuku thinks, yells in annoyance, followed by quickly a lighter and fonder. "It makes you look real cute, like a little schoolgirl." "It is a middle school uniform that you're wearing," Kurogiri chimes in from behind the bar. "You're the only underaged individual here, not to mention the only female, with the exception of Magne, of course, but she's still resting, so it's unlikely Midori Izuku's talking about her." "Will you all knock it off?" Shigaraki snaps as he glares around the room at the villains. None look ashamed at all, including Kurogiri, who Izuku had thought worshipped the ground that Shigaraki walked on by the way he spoke about him. "Let me think. You're all so annoying, I'm trying to talk." Despite not looking sheepish in the slightest, the entirety of the bar does quiet down. Shigaraki has some power over the League, at least. The decay villain takes another threatening step towards Izuku, arching down as he scratches at his neck so they're face to face. "What the hell are you playing at here, hero? There are no kids here, none but you and that human explosion behind you." The villain sneers the word hero like it leaves a foul taste in his mouth, and Izuku can just barely stop himself from flinching back in a wince as he helplessly is forced nose to nose with one of the scariest villains he's personally ever met. Izuku wrinkles his nose, gearing up to continue to insist he's literally looking at a small child, and to demand answers when a tiny but steady voice cuts him off. He's right. He turned slightly to see that the child had stepped up beside Shigaraki with an unwavering confidence. She's so small beside him, and doesn't look scared at all. Does she even know who she's standing beside? What Shigaraki can do? Does she not realize the danger? He regards her carefully, and she does the same back before sighing. How are you even able to see me? And that's when it all clicks. Izuku sucks in a breath and leans away from Shigaraki as much as he can to really look at the child. She's young, that much he'd noticed before, but now that he really looks, he can see the faint translucence to her small frame. It's really hardly noticeable, even as she takes small steps towards him. He always misses that tiny detail unless he's specifically looking for it, which is not something he does. Ghosts are usually few and far between, and he knows he'd look far crazier checking every single person that he comes into contact with to see if they're a ghost than he does occasionally getting confused and talking to a spirit around living people. Still, it's a lot to wrap his head around, especially in this instance. And he looks over at the small, elementary-aged child who stood in front of him surrounded by villains in a bar. A ghost. This little girl is a ghost. She's the youngest ghost he's ever met. Not that he doesn't believe there are younger ones out there somewhere. She's just one of the youngest he's personally seen. A kid. A dead kid. This little girl had already died, and Izuku's heart seizes in his chest at that fact. She's so young. Izuku cuts himself off by biting sharply at his own tongue. He jerks his attention from the child and back to Shigaraki, who's looking at him like he's some sort of complex puzzle. Or maybe he's just psychotic, which is incredibly offensive because Shigaraki... Has he ever looked in a mirror? Oh, so you can see me and hear me, but you couldn't tell I'm dead? The little girl crosses her arms over her chest, bottom lip poked out in a pout. What are you? What do you mean, oh? Shigaraki snaps as he pushes even closer into Izuku's space. He's only an inch or so from the tips of their noses touching, and Izuku feels crowded and afraid. Answer my question, disciple. Who the hell are you talking about? Izuku tries to swallow down his fear. His heart thrums with panic, and the only thing in his mind is, ooh, I fucked up. I made a mistake. You're all blurry to me. I mean, I can hardly see out of one eye, so, when Toga, I believe that's her name, was beside me, I couldn't really, my mistake. The little ghost beside him snorts a laugh, hiding a smile behind her hand. Izuku really wants to shoot a scowl at her, just in her direction, but that's too risky right now. Instead, the teen swallows heavily, praying to whatever deity exists that Shigaraki will buy it. Last thing he needs now is to out himself to the League of Villains when his guardians and teachers don't even know. And it's not technically an excuse either. Not completely, at least. He really is impaired in one eye. It's so swollen he can hardly see out of it. The Advil didn't help much with the swelling. His vision is blurry, and having only one working eye when he's used to two distorts what he can see. It'll take some getting used to. He is quite swollen, Shigaraki Tomura. Kurogiri hums out from behind the bar. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku sees the little girl frown heavily, eyes narrowed on the void villain. I'd imagine his vision is impaired due to his injury. And Toga's walking around looking like a prepubescent teen, Dabi adds dryly. Can't blame the kid for calling us out when she looks like we stole her from her walk home from junior high. He's a hero class kid after all. Hey! Toga huffs out in annoyance, contorting in her seat to kick the dark-haired man. You're so mean, Dabi. I don't look that young. And I'm here on my own free will, Izuku. Whatever, Shigaraki snaps, prompting a hush to fall over the villains in the bar. Will you all just shut up? Enough bickering. There's a pause as Shigaraki glares around his subordinates before his irritated gaze is flicking back to Izuku where it hardens. Listen here, Midori Izuku. Don't ever accuse me of anything like that again, got it? You won't find any children here. Kids are annoying. Vile little creatures that cry and whine, and I refuse to have them around. Izuku manages a nervous nod, hoping it doesn't come off as nervous. Takes everything in him to not chance a glance at the little girl, but he somehow manages. It's hard not to feel afraid when Shigaraki's hand stretches out toward him like he's about to decay him before stopping and pulling back after what appears to be a short internal debate. The little girl makes a sort of huh sound as Shigaraki pulls back like she's been waiting for Izuku's attention to speak. She glares heatedly at an unknowing Shigaraki before glancing at Izuku to make sure he has his focus before narrowing her gaze back on the League of Villains. "It's funny that you're speaking of annoying, whiny little things." Izuku almost chokes on his own breath as he desperately caps the surprise rising in his lungs. He knows, logically, that this is a ghost talking to the villain, a ghost who won't be heard, but anyone who's brave enough to say something like that about someone like Shigaraki is to be feared, ghost or not. Izuku lets his eyes flick back to where the child has stood, not letting his gaze linger in fear of being called out or discovered. She looks smug, almost proud of the retort, even if Shigaraki can't hear her. Doesn't even know someone had said anything. The only thing Izuku knows for certain is the fact that he is incredibly glad for her sake that he's the only one who can hear her. He is sure Shigaraki wouldn't be too pleased to hear something like that come from a child. Izuku bites his bottom lip as he watches half-heartedly as the child comes across the room and pulls herself up onto a bar stool. He can't help but wonder why this little girl's here, what's keeping her here, and who does she know? He knows Oboro trails after his high school friends, and a lot of other ghosts he comes into contact will follow loved ones, but he just can't imagine who this little girl is tailing. Which member of the League of Villains had a kid, let alone a kid that died? He has questions, but he refuses to ask when there are witnesses around. He doesn't know what Shigaraki would do with him if he realized Izuku could see the dead, could use someone who's deceased and their quirk, or, well, they could use his quirk to use their own quirk. There's no point getting into the mechanics of it right now. The point is, it would be dangerous for Shigaraki to figure it out. Izuku forces his attention back onto the villains. It's then that he realizes that Shigaraki's waiting for an actual response. Eyes narrowed intensely, with a scowl curling his features. He's closer than he had been before, and Izuku wonders if the villain has ever heard of personal space, or if he just doesn't care. Izuku swallows again. "I won't." An apology sits on the tip of his tongue, but he refuses to say it. He will not apologize to his captors. Shigaraki does not deserve an apology when Izuku and Katsuki are tied down and being held hostage. "Good," the man snaps. "I may be interested in you, disciple, but that doesn't mean I won't kill you if it turns out you're more work than you're worth. Sensei and I don't need you. We need him." Shigaraki's chin jerks towards a still unconscious Katsuki, and protectiveness swirls in Izuku's stomach. "What do you need him for?" "Wouldn't you like to know? Worried about your little classmate?" Shigaraki snarls in annoyance. "You know, you're not in any position to be demanding answers from me, Midori Izuku. This is my game, and you're just a player. I'm the main character here, and you're nothing but my reward for completion of a hard level." Izuku ducks his head in a nod, not wanting to irritate the one in control any more than he already has. There's so much he wants to ask, so many questions, but he also knows that Shigaraki isn't completely sane, and he can't risk pushing too much. Shigaraki finally pulls back, squeezing the hand in his hand as he digs into his other pocket. "I've been thinking a lot since I met you, disciple. First you punched my Nomu, nearly indestructible, built to hold its own against All Might, himself, and yet you managed to make it stagger. That in and of itself is curious. A quirk so powerful it can stand against Nomu. Strength on par with that of the #1 hero." Shigaraki glares. "Then those stupid clouds appeared, in the attack at the USJ and again during that sports festival. Twice I saw those irritating clouds, in person and on screen, getting in the way, ruining my plans, fucking up the sports festival. I hate intermissions, making me wait." Izuku feels his mouth run dry at the mention of the clouds, of Oboro. Oh no, maybe Shigaraki's more observant than Izuku gave him credit for if he's connecting the USJ to the sports festival. Both places Oboro had managed to use his quirk. The villain doesn't seem to notice the dread that's painting Izuku's face, so he just keeps speaking. "Something at the USJ kept me trapped in those annoying clouds. Something kept Kurogiri from locating me, and something kept my Nomu from finishing the job and ending both you and Eraserhead. And that same something made an appearance at the sports festival, too, weeks later." Shigaraki's quiet, glaring across the room before looking back at Izuku sharply. "Would you care to take a guess of what just happened? To show up along with the clouds at both places, both times that phenomenon occurred, Midoriya?" Izuku swallows, keeping his eyes on the villain, but making no move to nod or shake his head despite having a pretty good idea of where this was going. He can't deny or confirm. He can't. If Shigaraki's been piecing this all together, he'll only be digging his own grave if he offers any confirmation. "No?" Shigaraki drawls. It was you, disciple. Both times my Nomu's about to kill you, and suddenly we can't see. You and those other heroic students are gone, and we can't find Eraserhead anywhere to finish him off. Then it's just you and that purple-haired brainwashing kid fighting during the festival, and suddenly the area's filled with clouds. Those can't be coincidences. Shigaraki cards 4 fingers through his hair, taking great care to keep the 5th finger raised as he shouts. No longer. Then a second later, the villain is slowly turning back toward Izuku. You know, if I didn't know any better, I'd think you have 2 quirks. Izuku feels like he's being punched in the stomach, his heart in his throat, his ears ringing. No. Shigaraki cannot know. No one can. But Shigaraki knowing, that's the worst possible thing to happen. Izuku is screwed. He is so screwed. But then you didn't help yourself at the mall when we were chatting. The villain growls lowly, and Izuku's attention jerks back up to him in surprise. I was waiting for those clouds. You were the connecting factor both times. You were there. Both times center of attention. You had to have had a connection to them. Those clouds saved your ass, but at the mall they didn't. I could have killed you, and you still didn't save yourself. Shigaraki's voice wavers, like he's bouncing between talking to Izuku and just talking to himself. I thought they were connected to you. But if you could use them at will, if they were a second quirk, you would have saved your own skin and tried to be heroic and apprehended me at the mall that day. Shigaraki glares hard at Izuku, almost daring him to defend himself. And you would have used it by now as well. A hero protects his friends, right? But I don't see you trying to rescue poor unconscious Bakugo Katsuki, the one who was my target and is the one I need. You ran forward to save him, right? So save him. Izuku opens his mouth to respond, but he can't even begin to think of a reply. His jaw snaps shut quietly, and he just stares wide-eyed at Shigaraki. Shigaraki's patience seems to be running thin, because soon after he stops talking, he's turning away with a snarl. I was wrong. Shigaraki scratches his neck, lips twitching in a scowl. I hate being wrong. It's almost funny that Shigaraki came to the correct conclusion but talked himself out of it. Izuku is incredibly thankful that he and Oboro didn't use their quirks at the mall, even though he knows that the ghost still blames himself for not stepping in and trying to help. If Oboro had tried to help, if any clouds appeared that day, Izuku's sure Shigaraki wouldn't have talked himself out of it. They very well may be having a different conversation if that was the case. How do you do it? Shigaraki stalks towards him. Who do you have working with you? No one, Izuku whispers hoarsely. I don't... Having 2 quirks is very rare, unless you're all for one, or you possess one for all. I just have an emitter quirk. Strength, you saw it. I mean, I punched the Nomu, right? Shigaraki glares down at him, over his nose, before looking up and regarding the watching villains sitting around the bar. Strength like All Might. I'm nowhere near as strong as All Might, Izuku defends desperately. All Might managed to punch the Nomu through the ceiling of the USJ. I hardly made it move. That heroic piece of garbage. Shigaraki snaps, eyes narrowed with rage. Launching a perfectly good Nomu away. I bet the police have it now. I hate him. Calm down, Shigaraki Tomura. Kurogiri chided softly from the bar. There are other Nomu for your use. I liked that one. Shigaraki snarls, whipping around to glare at the bartender. Oh, here we go. Dabi scoffs as he sips at his drink. Shut up! Shigaraki hisses in Dabi's direction. I don't have time to waste my efforts talking to that useless hero kid. Someone get me when that explosive one wakes up. For now, Kurogiri, let's go. Sensei wants to see us. Yes, Shigaraki Tomura. Hitoshi isn't sure what to think when he finds out the news that his uncle and pseudo-cousin have been attacked and that Izuku's now missing. He loses a bit of time in between his mother settling her hand on his and explaining what she knew about Izuku's kidnapping and the attack on the boot camp. Talking in that soft-spoken voice that she only ever uses on him and Uncle's show and the time when she finally leaves for work. Honestly, it takes more insisting on his part, telling her that he's fine, than he'd care to admit for her to finally relent and slip out at the door, leaving him alone so that she could make it to work on time. Frankly, Hitoshi was a little annoyed. Just because Izuku was missing and his uncles are undoubtedly a mess doesn't mean Hitoshi needs a babysitter. Was a bit of time alone to think too much to ask for? He doesn't know what he would have done if his mother hadn't listened to him, if she'd insisted and ignored what he was saying, She has a tendency to be a bit overprotective, and it makes sense considering her little brother is a hero, and that Hitoshi himself is aiming for the same thing, but it's still suffocating at times like this. Now, though, Hitoshi isn't sure what to think as he sits alone at the table, surrounded by bowls of cold rice and miso soup. He's already late for school, or he would be if his mother hadn't insisted he didn't need to go. "You don't have to force yourself, sweetheart," she'd said quietly, squeezing at his hand. "I know this is a lot, and I'm sure that none of your teachers or classmates would blame you for taking some time to process. Izuku's essentially your cousin. He's your friend. You're allowed to not be okay." "I'm fine," Hitoshi replied, voice teetering between snapping and quiet. "I shouldn't miss school. I need to get into heroics, Mom. I should be there. This has nothing even to do with me. I doubt the rest of the school is even aware." "Take one day, Hitoshi." And her tone had shifted a bit to a more demanding one. "Izuku's missing. I know you're hell-bent on being the very best and making it into your uncle's class, but I know you best, kiddo. And I know you're not okay. Just, please, for me, Hitoshi, take a day to think. Take a day to process." He'd known then that she wouldn't insist he stay home if he insisted that he should still go himself. Her tone hadn't been finality. It had been a pleading and demanding one. That "I know you're not fine and I'm giving you an out" sort of tone. And so he had. He'd relented, and he's not sure if that had been for his own sake or for hers in the end. He ducked his head in a tiny nod and pressed his chin against his sternum when his mother had smiled softly and pressed a thankful kiss to the top of his head. It had taken even more work to convince his mother that she should go to work. "I'm fine," Hitoshi sighed, trying not to slam his head on the table in defeat. "You don't need to stay home with me. You need to go to work. You're busy. You've been talking for weeks about this meeting that you have scheduled. I don't need a babysitter." "It's not babysitting, Hitoshi." His mother groans like she's been talking to a child. Case in point, honestly. "It's a mother being worried about her son. I don't think you should be alone." "And I don't think I need a babysitter." The teen fires back. "I really am fine. I already agreed to not go to school, and it's not like this is the first time I've stayed home alone. I'm 15, Mom, almost 16. I don't need a babysitter." "Your friend went missing," his mom reminds softly. "This is stressful and scary, and I know for a fact that your uncles are scared too, and for good reason. 2 students were taken from a school outing after the entire camp was attacked. You're allowed to need someone, Hitoshi. You're allowed to be scared." "I'm fine." He doesn't have the heart to tell her that even if he did need someone, or if he didn't need to be alone, it wouldn't be his mother or even father that he'd be looking for. He loves them, of course, and at times like this his mother's comfort is the only thing he's looking for, but not now. Not for this. If he did think he needed someone, which he doesn't, he'd want to be with his uncles. They're the ones who'd need him back. They're the ones he's looking for, the ones who understand this. The ones who feel what he's feeling and know what he's talking about. It's personal for them, just as it is for him. Izuku is missing. His parents know of Izuku, sure. His mom had met the green-haired teen exactly once when she stopped by Shota and Hisashi's apartment to pick him up a couple days before the boot camp, and his dad hadn't even yet met the other teen, but that didn't mean they knew Izuku. That didn't mean they understood the bottomless pit feeling in Hitoshi's stomach that he can only imagine is worse for his uncles. It didn't mean they understood the anxiety that his friend was missing, the sick feeling that he was captured by the villains, who were wild cards at best. Just because they knew of Izuku didn't mean they knew Izuku's sunshiny personality or his frankly scary intelligence, how Izuku was so kind to everyone, including Hitoshi, who'd been nothing but an asshole to him in the first period between the sports festival and finding out that they were both in relation to Shota in one way or another. They didn't know Izuku. Maybe they're scared and worried by relation, but they don't miss him. "Really," Hitoshi whispers out, defeat creeping into his voice. "I'm fine alone. I'll be fine. I'd actually like to be alone for a little while. I need some time to think. I won't go to school, but please don't hover over me." When he looked up, his mother's expression had softened. "You really want to stay home alone? I'm serious, Hitoshi. I don't mind staying home with you. You're more important than my meetings, and even if you did insist I go to that meeting, I'm sure Dad wouldn't mind coming home to be with you." "I just want to think." Hitoshi pauses before adding, "Alone." His mother's quiet for a second before she lets out a sigh. "All right." "What?" "All right," she repeats, though she doesn't look completely sold on the idea. "I'll go to work, but listen to me. If you need me, call, and I'll come home right away, all right? I trust you, and I know that you don't need a babysitter, but please be smart about this. Call me or your dad or even your uncles if you need us, okay?" "Okay," His mother studies his face, eyes sweeping over his features as she looks for any dishonesty or fear he might show. He doesn't think she finds anything, because a moment later she is sighing again, lifting a hand to ruffle her fingers through his unkempt purple hair before she leans down to press a light kiss against his forehead. "I have to get going," she mumbles as she pulls away. "Promise me you'll call if you need to, or if you plan on going somewhere. I know you like to walk around and clear your head, but with kids missing and villains running loose, you need to let someone know where you are." "I will," Hitoshi huffs. "Promise." "Good." His mother hums out as she studies him one last time before disappearing into the other room to gather her stuff and put on her shoes. "I love you, Hitoshi. Be good." "Love you," Hitoshi replies honestly as he digs his chopsticks into his rice. "Have a good day at work." His mother leaves after that, and he's left alone with his thoughts. He doesn't know how long he actually sits at the table, but by the time he remembers he was supposed to be finishing breakfast, the top layer of his rice has hardened and the miso soup is cold to the touch. He's still not hungry, so he pushes the bowls back and flops down on the table. His thoughts won't settle, but at the same time he's not really thinking anything. He just can't seem to wrap his head around the fact that Izuku's gone, that someone had taken him. He almost pities the poor idiot who'd taken Izuku. Not only are Shota and Hisashi going to tear the world apart in order to find him, but Hitoshi also knows that All Might has a rather soft spot for Izuku as well. Plus, there's all the pro-hero friends his uncles have, Auntie Nem and Nezu and Vlad King and pretty much all the Yuuei teachers, not to mention the whole network of underground heroes who are going to help as well. He knows Izuku will be located some way or another, but he feels useless sitting here. He wants to be a hero, yet all he's doing is sitting at his dining table. He should be helping. He should be looking for Izuku. He should be... Wait a second. "Ro!" Hitoshi gasps out, jolting up in his seat. "Ro, there's a ghost who could possibly know where Izuku is. Ro might know. Why is he just thinking of this now? Izuku's been gone since last night. Surely Ro must know something, even if he only knows some details, the kind of details that Hisashi wouldn't tell his mother, let alone tell her over the phone. The ghost must know something, right?" Hitoshi's standing before he even knows what he's doing. He moves swiftly to the drawer in the Genkin where his parents always keep their keys, including the spare key to his uncle's apartment. There's a couple of different key rings dropped thoughtlessly in the drawer, but it doesn't take long to find the one he's looking for. With the key in hand, Hitoshi tugs on a sweater and slips into his shoes. He leaves the house quickly, making sure that he has his wallet and his student transportation pass. It's not until he's on the bus heading towards the apartment does he think that he needs to text Hisashi and warn him that he's coming over, even if Hisashi probably isn't there. He barely entertains the thought of texting Uncle Sho. If he thinks that Hisashi's stressed, then Uncle Sho must be near catatonic at this point. He doesn't want to bother him at all. Truthfully, he doesn't want to bother either of them, but he also doesn't want to just show up at their apartment and let himself in. Last thing he needs is for one of them to come home randomly and think that he's an intruder, especially after their kid had just been kidnapped. And he'd be pretty dead if his mom and dad went home and he wasn't there. He knows the first thing either of them will do is text the other, followed by texting his uncles. He has half a mind to just text his parents, but knows that'll raise more questions he doesn't want to answer. And honestly, Hitoshi could not deal with someone hovering over his shoulder right now. "Hey, are you home?" It takes a while for a response. He must be busy, either with Uncle Sho or tending to the other students who'd been in the attack, or even talking with the police. His uncles are never one to ignore texts. He doubts that they've left the hospital. He knows how protective of all his students Uncle Sho tends to get, and as much as he likes to groan about this year's 1A, Hitoshi knows better than anyone that Shota already has a soft spot for them. "No, we're at the hospital with Tsukuchi. Sorry, Tosh. Why? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I left a book in Izuku's room, and I was wondering if I could grab it." The next response comes faster. Hitoshi can almost imagine the confusion on Hisashi's face, a cocked eyebrow as he reads the message and tries to make sense of it. To be fair, it does sound like an odd request, or maybe just an out-of-place one. Maybe it sounds a little insensitive considering Izuku's missing, and Shota and Hisashi are probably worried out of their minds, and here Hitoshi is asking about a book. If he weren't so intent on getting into that apartment, hanging on to a hope that the ghost that he'd barely met before might have answers to his friend's disappearance, he might have just brushed this whole conversation off and given up in embarrassment. He doesn't feel like such a great nephew or a cousin right now, but he's praying that this will all work out, that Ro will be able to help Hitoshi in some way, and he wasn't an asshole for no reason. When this is all over, and Izuku's home, Hitoshi will make sure to apologize to Hisashi for the insensitive request and for bothering him like he is. A book? Sho and I are pretty busy over here, Toshi. I don't think either of us can make it home anytime soon. Do you really need it that bad? I can use the spare key. You don't have to come home. I'll be super quick. I know you guys are busy. I just really need that book. Hitoshi bites his bottom lip as he taps the side of his phone in thought. He feels silly talking about grabbing a book, distracting his uncle when they should be focusing on finding Izuku and bringing him home. It's nothing more than a desperate excuse, and not a very good one at that. But Hitoshi knows Izuku has a lot of books, and he knows it'll be believable. He just needs to get into that apartment. Still, he doesn't know where Ro hangs out. He doesn't even really know if he'll find the ghost in the apartment. He knows Ro likes Izuku, so maybe the ghost is with him. Hitoshi's not sure whether the thought is comforting or worrying. He shakes his head and types out another text, one that'll hopefully plead his case. Sorry, I just borrowed the book from a neighbor, and then lent it to Izuku by mistake, and he wants it back now. I know you're busy. Hitoshi stares down at his phone. He's looking at the screen and waiting for a reply. Izashi doesn't reply fast, so Hitoshi thinks the man might be thinking it over or talking to his uncle about it. He doesn't think he'll be denied. It's not like he's dragging them away from something important to unlock a door for him. He just needs to get in there. There's a chance that some answers to his questions might be sitting idly in that apartment. Answers to Izuku's whereabouts. Any answers. He's desperate. Hitoshi jolts from his thoughts when the phone vibrates in his hands at the replying message. The screen had blacked out due to inactivity, but a breath of relief rushes out of his lungs as he reads Izashi's message on the screen. Just make sure you lock up, okay? Hitoshi shoots off a quick thank you text before pocketing his phone and getting ready to hop off the bus as it slows to a stop a few blocks away from his uncle's apartment building. When he gets off the bus, Hitoshi rushes up the stairs and pauses at the apartment door. There's something eerie about being here when no one else is. For the longest time, he'd been scared shitless of the ghost that he claimed lived at his uncle's apartment. His uncles had always told him that ghosts didn't exist, even though sometimes Izashi looked just as spooked as Hitoshi. He never could have even imagined himself coming here alone, let alone to actually contact the ghost he now knows exists. How the times have changed. Hitoshi unlocks the door easily, pocketing the key so he doesn't lose it. Hitoshi pauses in uncertainty once he steps through the door. Now that he's actually in the apartment, he doesn't really know how to continue. Does he just call out? Will Ro do something? Izuku had always said the ghost uses energy, so how will Ro be able to respond without Izuku here? What if the ghost isn't even here? Hitoshi slips his shoes off and makes a beeline for Izuku's room. He pushes down the tightening feeling in his stomach in favor of flipping the lights on and sitting on the edge of the friend's bed. Ro? Why does he feel like an idiot talking to nothing? Are you here? He waits for a while, glaring around the room like something will just jump out at him, like Ro the ghost will just suddenly materialize and answer all his questions. God, Hitoshi feels like an idiot. This is so stupid. He's probably not even... The teen mutters to himself before he sharply cuts himself off, pausing where he'd been pushing himself up off the bed, ready to leave when the lights overhead flicker. Hitoshi freezes, eases back down onto the mattress. Ro? It flickers again before shutting off completely. Hitoshi just manages to keep his startled exclamations to himself as the light turns back on after a long second. The lights aren't just spasming, right? This is really you, Ro. It flickers again. Hitoshi clicks his tongue. Okay, turn the light off for no, and flicker it for yes. The light flickers briefly before it shuts off without warning. After a second, the light is back on. Hitoshi's quiet for a moment. The lights don't do anything, not that he thought that he was imagining anything, or that the lights really were just malfunctioning or anything at all. Okay, you know what happened to Izuku, right? Instantly, the lights flicker overhead. Thank God. He does not want to have to explain that Izuku's missing to Izuku's ghost friend, though Ro probably would have figured it out by now anyways. Were you there, with him when it happened? Hitoshi winces as the light flickers twice, like, the lights don't want to admit it, but they do anyways. Do you know where Izuku is? For the first time, the light doesn't do anything instantly. For a moment, Hitoshi thinks that maybe Ro left at some point, and then he's blanketed in darkness. No. He doesn't know where Izuku is. Damn it. Hitoshi reaches up to card his fingers through his hair, stressfully. Damn it. The lights flicker, even though he didn't ask anything. Ro seems to agree with the sentiment. Hitoshi knows Ro has a sense of humor from when they'd played games together, and he won't lie and say it isn't nice to see a bit of normalcy, even if it's from a ghost. So you were there, but you don't know where Izuku is now? The light flickers and Hitoshi lets out a sigh. The light flickers a second time, agreeing once again with Hitoshi's exhausted exhale. The boy manages a tired laugh at the thought. Do you think you can hold the game controller, or a pencil or something? There's a pause before the light flickers off. Hitoshi had feared that Ro wouldn't have as much power without Izuku, and that's clearly true. It's a good thing Ro's been playing around with lights since before Izuku met them. They have at least one means of communication. Okay, that's fine. So can you tell me what happened? Hitoshi asks, adding a quick, via yes and no answers, of course, and as an afterthought. The light flickers once again, and Hitoshi lets out another exhale that sounds suspiciously like a sigh before he gives the room a light smile. All right, this might take a while. A couple more hours have passed, Izuku thinks. There's no clocks anywhere, and none of the villains have been kind enough to tell him the time when he asks. He hasn't seen Kurogiri since the man had trailed off after Shigaraki, but Izuku hopes he'll get to talk to him again. He'd been far kinder than the other villains here, and maybe he'd be nice enough to tell him the time as well. He knows it's been a couple hours at least by now, pulsing pain in his arms that's been starting to throb even worse. It's returned full force, and it aches bad enough that it's starting to cloud his thoughts. The Advil is worn off, and now he's left in agony. Despite the hours passing as slow as molasses, there hasn't been a second where the two students have been left alone. There's always a steady stream of villains standing guard in the bar like they have shifts or something. That's what Izuku's noticed, at least. They don't want to really leave them alone without supervision. It's probably smart to not leave two heroic course students unattended, but it almost feels mocking when Izuku himself is in no shape to do anything, let alone escape, and Kacchan still hasn't roused. It's irritating. There's always someone watching. And even when the villains aren't paying explicit attention, it always feels like someone is still watching. He always feels eyes on him, but it's worse here. At this point, he thinks that he sees all the villains in the bar with their rounds. He's not sure that he can match names to faces just yet, but he knows there's 8 of them altogether. He thinks that if he keeps listening in, at some point he'll have all their names. It's probably going to be useful to the police. Maybe. He knows that all these villains are probably going by aliases instead of their given names, so he doesn't really know if it'll be useful. Still, it's worth a shot, and there's nothing else he can be doing. It's killing him to just be sitting here idly while the two of them are in danger. The ghost child hadn't left the room once, has instead spent her time studying both Izuku and Kacchan. She doesn't say much, hardly even regards Izuku more than brief bouts of eye contact that she usually just glances away from first. The bar hadn't opened yet, so Izuku has no idea what time it really is, not to mention the fact that this bar could have odd hours if it's a bar that caters to villains and nightlife. Kurogiri had said it was around 3 when he asked him earlier, and he knows it feels like it's been a crumpled mess on the floor for at least a few hours, probably 5, since he woke up. He hasn't seen Shigaraki or Kurogiri since they left the room, supposedly to talk to Sensei, all for one. Izuku can just pray that Shigaraki doesn't mention him at all. But he's not a part of their plans, after all. Both Kurogiri and Shigaraki himself told him as such. That does mean he's a little more worried about what they have planned for Kacchan, though. He is part of their plans. What the hell could the villains want with Kacchan? Why him? Izuku cocks his head up to look at Katsuki. It's concerning how long he's been asleep. Kacchan hadn't been injured or anything as far as Izuku had seen. Maybe the void travel did take more out of him than it did Izuku. Everyone was different. Izuku lets his gaze shift from Kacchan and over to the villain watching them. The man has a lizard mutation sort of quirk, and Izuku faintly remembers seeing him when he had found Mandalay. He said something about the hero killer's stain, but Izuku can't remember what. "What's your name?" He knows his voice comes out soft, but it's all he can do to not rouse the sleeping lizard-mutated villain who's slumped into one of the booths. Izuku glances quickly over to the tone that he's sure had been adequate before looking at the little girl still propped up at the bar. "Me?" she asks with a raised eyebrow, and all Izuku can do is nod. "Hana." "Hana," Izuku repeats softly. "That's a pretty name." The child's nose wrinkles like she doesn't really quite believe the honesty in his tone. She swirls around on the stool to face him, eyeing him for what feels like the 1,000th time. Her gaze scans up him, and for a second Izuku's reminded of how Nemo scans everyone who isn't Shota when they get too close to her. He misses the cats. "How do you see me?" the little girl inquires as she slips off the stool finally. She walks confidently across the bar until she stood in front of Izuku. Similarly to how Shigaraki had earlier, though she at least has some personal space etiquette. I don't know, he answers honestly, and it's true. He really doesn't know, never has, and probably never will know. It's not like this is something you can just ask doctors about, even quirk specialists. I've always been able to see people like you. I'm just different, I guess. You mean you see dead people? Izuku smiles a bit at the childlike bluntness. Yeah. How come you couldn't tell I was dead before? She seems satisfied with the answer, satisfied enough to kneel down on the ground before him like they're the same height. The strain of looking up off his neck feels heavenly as he fixes his attention ahead of himself. You thought I was really here? You don't look much different to me, Izuku shrugs, which is a mistake as currents of pain shoot through his arms and to his chest. He wheezes out, eyes watering as he squeezes them shut. You'll wake Spinner if you're too loud, Hana chides. You don't want to talk when people are listening. Is it because you're crazy? I'm not crazy, Izuku mutters as he wills the pain to settle. When it does, he slivers his eyes open and looks back at Hana, who's watching him in interest. People are sometimes mean when you're different, and you are really here, Hana. Even if people can't normally see you, you do exist. Doesn't count if no one can see me, she huffs as her arms cross over her chest. Why are people so mean to you? Just because you see dead people, I think it's cool. Izuku knows better than to shrug this time around. I don't know. I think people are afraid of the things they don't understand. Sometimes we're not very nice when we're afraid. People don't like things that are different. Oh. Hana's quiet for a second as she slips from her knees down onto her butt. Maybe that's why people were so mean to my brother. Izuku gives a thoughtful hum. Is he different too? The little girl gives a slow nod. He didn't have a quirk for a long time. And oh, isn't that something? Someone else being treated differently because they didn't have a quirk, different compared to normal, quirk standards. I'm sorry your brother was treated different for something he couldn't change about himself. The girl gives a nod, a thoughtful one this time. Our dad wasn't very nice to him because he didn't have one. I didn't mind that he didn't have a quirk, and neither did Mama, but Dad really did. I'm sorry, Izuku says quietly because he doesn't know what else to say. Why? She furrows her brow. It's not your fault Dad was mean sometimes. Izuku really isn't in the mood to explain an empathetic apology to a child, a ghost child, so he just shakes his head with a tiny smile. The girl's nose wrinkles as she eyes him before she huffs out a light breath. I think you're crazy. Izuku actually lets out a tiny laugh at that, a ghost calling him crazy for something other than seeing ghosts. Figures. They lapse into silence, and Izuku lets his eyes slip shut when Hana pulls her knees up to her chest and rests her chin on top of the indent between them. It's the ghost who breaks the silence. How'd you get hurt? Izuku lets one eye fall open. I was saving a little boy from a villain attack. The child nods, looking away. Was it one of these villains? Izuku is quiet as he thinks it over. Normally he wouldn't hesitate to admit he was attacked by a bulking villain. There's something about the way Hana asks, soft and cautious, that has Izuku hesitating, though. The child sounds remorseful, like she doesn't approve of what's going on behind closed doors. And besides, Izuku doesn't know who this child really is, who she's following, and the last thing she needs is to upset her by talking shit about a villain that she may very well be related to. He chooses not to answer, instead asks a question of his own. Why do you stay here, Hana? I follow my brother, the girl tells him without hesitation. I wasn't a very good big sister, and we all left him alone, so now I don't... She glares down at the ground. I don't want him to be alone, even if he thinks he is. I wasn't a very good sister, but I can be one now. Who's your brother? Izuku asks. She doesn't quite look like any of the villains he's seen. Perhaps under the masks she looks like Mr. Compress or Twice, but he can't be sure. Shimura Tenko, she offers with a light smile. He is my little brother. Tenko. Izuku tastes the name, but is trying desperately to match a name to a face. He hasn't heard that name before. He's never even heard anyone mention that name. Who is... Oh, the girl huffs blandly. Right, he doesn't go by that name anymore. Sensei gave him a new one. I think Shigaraki Tomura is a stupid name. Tenko suits him much better. I'll always call him Tenko. Izuku feels his whole body tense as the information sinks in. Shigaraki. This child is Shigaraki's older sister. Hana knows about Sensei? Hana knows about all for one. He doesn't know what to think, what to feel. He has absolutely no idea how to process this. This is weird. This is far more personal than Izuku thought it would be when he first saw the child, and this is Shigaraki's older sister. What the hell? Izuku jolts up at the sound of a door opening. He wants to look away, but he's focused on where Hana is glaring slightly at the newcomer. Spinner also jerks awake, wiping a trail of drool from his mouth as he glares heatedly at Kurogiri, who is the one stood in the doorway. "You're relieved of watch duty," the void-quirked man offers, an easily flickering eye, and he's watching the reptile-esque villain still drying up drool with his hand. "I will keep watch. Perhaps you'd like to go take a nap." The lizard throws a look of annoyance at Kurogiri as he slips past him and disappears through the doorway, leading back to where Izuku assumes the villains reside without a word. Izuku's still watching Hana, who huffs out a breath and finally stands. She crosses back to the bar and pulls herself up onto the stools, leaning heavily on her elbow as she watches Izuku. Midori Izuku. Izuku barely manages to drag his attention to the man, yellow eyes slivered in curiosity. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of that would have been hilarious if Izuku wasn't suffocating under the fact that Hana was Shigaraki's elder sister. This little ghost child was older than Shigaraki. He'd stumbled upon a fountain of information. Wide green eyes watch as the villain walks into the room. Kurogiri doesn't seem to care that Izuku doesn't say anything, just steps up to the bar. "It's been several hours since you took some Advil. Would you like some more?" The teen nods numbly, and that's all the villain needs before he's grabbing another glass and turning to the tap to fill it up. Hana watches the void-quirked man with a small frown. Izuku swallows both the pills and the water with nothing more than muscle memory, thoughts running rampant as he watches the little girl, who watches him right back. All right, everyone, this concludes Chapter 29 of Yuuei Survival Guide. Chapter 30 will be next. Hope you guys are still enjoying this one. I like the fact that the author included Hana in this, so let me know your thoughts and reactions below, and as always, thank you so much for listening.